On a crisp October morning in 2019, the rusty pickup truck bounced along the gravel road that led away from Meadow Creek, Iowa, population 862. Behind the wheel, gripping a rejection letter that had grown wrinkled from repeated readings, sat Abigail Parker, 18 years old, and about to discover that sometimes our greatest disappointments lead to the most extraordinary opportunities. The sun had barely risen over the endless cornfields, casting long shadows across the frost-covered ground. Abigail, Abby, to everyone who knew her, had been awake for hours, completing her farm chores before making the 2-hour drive to Cedar Falls Community College. It wasn't Princeton, Stanford, or MIT, all schools that had rejected her despite perfect grades and stellar recommendations. It wasn't even Iowa State, which had offered only a partial scholarship she couldn't afford. It was simply the closest educational institution within her financial reach. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from today. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something truly special for you. The year had been crushing for Abby's dreams. The handmade particle detector she'd constructed in her family's barn, built from salvaged electronics, recycled materials, and ingenious workarounds for equipment she couldn't afford, had won regional science competitions but failed to impress the admission committees of elite universities. They'd praised her creativity, but questioned the rigor of her rural education and her lack of formal laboratory experience. Her father, a third-generation farmer struggling under mounting debt, had given her exactly two options: attend an affordable local college while helping on the farm, or take a full-time position at the agricultural processing plant where her mother had worked for 15 years. With her younger siblings' education still ahead, the family couldn't support her ambitious goals of studying astrophysics at a prestigious institution. With her parents' ancient truck borrowed for the day and most of her possessions crammed into 2 duffel bags, Abby had turned to the only path forward she could see: community college for 2 years, then transfer, assuming she could somehow piece together enough scholarships and loans to make it work. Ambitious solar radiation study earns high marks but lacks institutional backing. Similar work being conducted at university level with superior equipment. Recommend candidate pursue more realistic aspirations within regional educational framework. The words from Princeton's detailed rejection letter still burned in her mind as she drove. The others had been more diplomatic but equally dismissive. Behind the polite academic language was a clear message: farm girls from nowhere, Iowa, don't become astrophysicists. Abby pulled into the community college parking lot and cut the engine. The campus, if you could call it that, consisted of 3 brick buildings surrounded by asphalt, a stark contrast to the ivy-covered walls and state-of-the-art research facilities she'd dreamed about since childhood. She rested her forehead against the steering wheel, allowing herself one last moment of disappointment before straightening her shoulders and reaching for her bags. Registration ends at noon, she reminded herself, checking the cracked face of her father's old watch, a high school graduation gift he could ill afford but insisted she needed for college. It was 10:17 a.m., plenty of time to get her class schedule sorted and find the student housing office. The administration building was crowded with last-minute registrants, mostly older students juggling work and education, and a few who, like Abby, appeared to be recent high school graduates. She joined the line for new student registration, clutching her acceptance letter and financial aid documents. "Parker?" called the registrar 20 minutes later. "Abigail Parker?" Abby approached the desk, where a tired-looking woman with frizzy grey hair and cat-eye glasses examined her paperwork. "Science track?" The woman raised her eyebrows. "Most ambitious program we offer. Prerequisites include advanced placement, courses in physics and calculus, I have those, Abby confirmed, sliding her high school transcript across the desk, plus additional self-study modules through MIT's open courseware. The registrar skimmed the transcript, her expression shifting from skepticism to mild interest. Valedictorian of Meadow Creek High. Impressive, though it's a small school, isn't it? 42 in my graduating class, Abby acknowledged. But our math teacher, Mr. Holloway, has a doctorate from Cornell. He helped me design an independent study curriculum. The registrar stamped several forms and began typing into an ancient computer. Science track it is, then. Your advisor will be Dr. Daniel Morgan. He handles all our advanced science students, both of you. She smiled slightly at her own joke. You'll need his signature on your final course selection. His office is in Franklin Hall, room 112. Abby thanked her and gathered her papers, grateful that at least the first hurdle had been cleared without incident. Outside the administration building, she consulted the campus map, locating Franklin Hall at the far end of the small campus. As she walked, she observed other students greeting each other with familiar ease, returning students who already had established connections. She felt the isolation acutely, having left behind her few close friends who'd all chosen state universities they could afford with sports scholarships or family support. Franklin Hall housed the science and mathematics departments, though departments was a generous term for what appeared to be a handful of classrooms and 3 faculty offices. Room 112 had a handwritten sign, Dr. D. Morgan, Physics, Astronomy, General Sciences. Abby knocked tentatively. It's open, called a distracted male voice. The office was barely larger than a storage closet, dominated by bookshelves overflowing, with worn textbooks and scientific journals. A middle-aged man with rumpled clothes and prematurely grey hair sat behind a desk covered in papers, peering at a laptop screen with intense concentration. Dr. Morgan? Abby ventured when he didn't. Look up, I'm Abigail Parker. The registrar said, I need your signature on my course selections. New student, he asked, still focused on his screen. Just leave your forms on that chair. I'll get to them this afternoon. Actually, registration ends at noon, Abby pointed. Out. And I need to secure housing today. Dr. Morgan finally looked up, clearly annoyed at the interruption. His eyes, magnified by thick glasses, scanned her quickly. Fine. Let's see what you've selected. He reviewed her proposed schedule with increasing attention, his initial irritation giving way to curiosity. Advanced physics, calculus 2, astronomy, computer programming and English composition, he read aloud. Ambitious first semester. Most of our students take a lighter load. I need to make the most of my time here, Abby explained. I'm planning to transfer after 2 years. To where exactly? Iowa State, hopefully. Maybe University of Iowa, if I can get enough scholarship money. Dr. Morgan leaned back in his chair, studying her more carefully. And what's your ultimate goal? Teaching high school science back in... He glanced at her paperwork. Meadow Creek. The dismissive assumption stung, but Abby was used to it. No, sir. I want to work for NASA, specifically in solar physics or stellar astronomy. To her surprise, Dr. Morgan didn't laugh or roll his eyes. Instead, he set down her papers and folded his hands. NASA is rather selective. What makes you think you have what it takes? It was a fair question, if bluntly asked. Abby hesitated, then decided honesty was her only option. I don't know if I do, but I've built my own equipment for studying solar radiation and particle detection. I've published observations on the NASA Citizen Science Portal for 3 years, and I won the Midwest Regional Young Scientist Award last spring. Now she had his full attention. You built your own equipment? Yes, sir. My family can't afford commercial scientific instruments, so I improvised. She pulled out her phone and showed him photos of her homemade particle detector. and the makeshift observatory she'd constructed in an abandoned silo on their farm. Dr. Morgan studied the photos with growing interest. "This is unexpected." He handed back her phone. "Who helped you design these systems?" "No one, really. I followed some online forums and adapted designs from scientific papers I could access through our library's interlibrary loan program. My physics teacher reviewed my work, but mostly just to make sure I wasn't going to electrocute myself." Long silence followed as Dr. Morgan appeared to reassess everything about the young woman standing before him. Finally, he signed her course registration forms with a decisive flourish. "I teach the advanced physics and astronomy courses," he said, handing back the papers. "Class starts Monday at 8 a.m. Don't be late and come prepared to discuss your designs." "In detail," Abby nodded, uncertain whether she'd impressed him or simply piqued his professional curiosity. Either way, she had her approved schedule and could now secure her housing assignment. She thanked him and turned to leave. "Ms. Parker," Dr. Morgan called as she reached the door. "Why didn't you get into those fancy schools you obviously applied?" The question caught her off guard with its directness. "They said my work lacked institutional backing and proper methodology," she admitted. "One reviewer suggested my results couldn't be verified because my equipment wasn't calibrated to industry standards." Dr. Morgan snorted. "Typical academic snobbery. Bring your research documentation to class on Monday, all of it." The student housing office presented another challenge. The dorms were already filled, with a waiting list of 15 names. The housing coordinator, a sympathetic woman named Mrs. Reeves, suggested off-campus alternatives. "There's a boarding house about 6 blocks from campus," she explained, marking the location on a town map. "Mrs. Winters has reasonable rates for students, though the accommodations are basic." Basic proved to be a generous description. The boarding house was a Victorian-era home that had seen better days, with peeling paint and sagging steps. Inside, narrow hallways led to tiny bedrooms with shared bathrooms. Mrs. Winters, a stern-faced widow in her 70s, showed Abby the only available room, an attic space with sloping ceilings and a single window overlooking the street. $200 monthly, utilities included, Mrs. Winters stated firmly. Breakfast provided weekdays. Communal kitchen privileges for the meals. No males above the first floor, no alcohol, no parties, no loud music. It would consume nearly half of Abby's carefully budgeted funds, but the alternative was a 40-minute commute each way from home, assuming her parents would let her borrow the truck daily, which was unlikely given the farm's demands. She signed the rental agreement and paid the first month plus security deposit, wincing as her bank balance dwindled precipitously. After bringing in her belongings, the 2 duffel bags plus a box of books and her laptop, Abby sat on the narrow bed and surveyed her new home. The space was clean but spare: bed, desk, chair, and a small dresser. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling, and the window offered a view of the community college's clock tower in the distance. It wasn't the ivy-covered dormitory she'd imagined, but it was hers, the first space that truly belonged to her alone. Tomorrow, she would buy supplies and organize her new room. She would write down her class schedule and map the most efficient routes between buildings. She would introduce herself to her housemates and locate the nearest grocery store. She would take the first concrete steps toward her future, however uncertain it might be. As evening approached, Abby carefully unpacked the one item she hadn't been able to leave behind: a battered notebook containing 3 years of solar observation data, atmospheric particle measurements, and hand-drawn schematics for equipment improvements. If Dr. Morgan was genuinely interested in her work, perhaps she'd found an unexpected ally in this unlikely place. She opened the notebook to a fresh page and wrote the date at the top, followed by a single sentence: Day 1 at Cedar Falls Community College, not where I plan to be, but perhaps where I need to be for now. The distant sound of a train whistle drifted through her open window, a reminder of how far she was from the prestigious coastal universities that had rejected her. But as she reviewed her notes and prepared for Monday's classes, Abby felt a small spark of determination rekindling. Cedar Falls might not be Princeton, but it was a step forward, and sometimes, she reminded herself, the path to the stars wasn't a direct route. Monday morning arrived with a steady rain that turned the campus walkways into muddy paths. Abby splashed her way to Franklin Hall, arriving 30 minutes early for her 8 a.m. advanced physics class. She'd spent the weekend reviewing her research notes and preparing a concise summary of her methodology, uncertain whether Dr. Morgan had been genuinely interested or simply humoring her. The classroom was empty except for a young man arranging equipment on a demonstration table. Tall and lanky, with thick-framed glasses and a NASA t-shirt visible beneath his unbuttoned flannel shirt. He looked up as Abby entered. "You're early," he said, adjusting what appeared to be a homemade spectroscope. "First-day enthusiasm won't last, trust me." "I wanted to review the syllabus before class," Abby replied, selecting a seat in the front row. "Are you Dr. Morgan's teaching assistant?" The young man laughed. "I wish, just his lab tech, Jason Mitchell." He extended a hand. "Senior year physics major with nowhere better to go?" "Abby Parker, freshman." She shook his hand, noticing calluses that matched her own, the mark of someone who worked with tools regularly. "Fresh meat," Jason grinned. "Fair warning. Morgan's brilliant but demanding. Half the class usually drops by midterms." He nodded toward her notebook. "That your research he mentioned? He told you about it?" He wouldn't shut up about it, Jason admitted, lowering his voice. "Spent all weekend theorizing about your methodology. Said you might be the first interesting student he's had in 5 years." Before Abby could respond, other students began trickling in, followed shortly by Dr. Morgan himself. The professor nodded briefly in Abby's direction before launching into his lecture without preamble or introduction. For the next hour, Abby found herself completely engaged as Dr. Morgan covered advanced concepts with a clarity and enthusiasm she'd rarely encountered. When he finally paused for questions, she realized she'd filled 6 pages with notes. "Before you leave," Dr. Morgan announced as students began packing up, "I expect a 3-page proposal for your semester research project by Friday. Ms. Parker, a word after class." As others filed out, Abby approached the demonstration table, where Dr. Morgan was examining her notebook, which she'd left as requested. "Your observations on the solar flare of April 2018 are particularly interesting," he said, without looking up. "You correlated particle detection spikes with radio wave anomalies using equipment you built yourself. How did you compensate for atmospheric interference?" "I used multiple detection locations," Abby explained, pulling out a hand-drawn map from her notebook. 3 sensors placed across our property at different elevations: the barn roof, the abandoned silo, and on top of the water tower when I could sneak up there. Dr. Morgan's eyebrows shot up. "You triangulated the readings? Using what? Synchronized. And timers? Modified smartphones," Abby admitted. "I wrote an app that coordinates timestamps and compiles the data." "You coded the app yourself?" "Basic Java. Nothing fancy." Dr. Morgan closed the notebook and fixed her with an intense stare. "Ms. Parker, why are you at Cedar Falls?" The question caught her off guard. "I told you, the elite schools rejected me, and this was what I could afford." "That doesn't answer my question. Why are you pursuing physics at all? With your background and limited resources, wouldn't a more practical field be appropriate?" Abby felt her face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and determination. "Because the universe doesn't care where you come from or what equipment you have access to. The laws of physics apply equally to everyone, and understanding them shouldn't be restricted to people born with privilege." A long silence followed before Dr. Morgan's stern expression softened slightly. "Well said." He handed back her notebook. "I'd like to see your particle detector. Is it portable?" "Parts of it are. The data logging system and the basic sensor array could fit in a backpack. The directional components would need to be rebuilt. Bring what you can to the lab tomorrow afternoon. Jason will give you access." He scribbled a note on department letterhead. "This gives you clearance to use our facilities, limited as they may be." As Dr. Morgan gathered his materials and left, Jason approached from the back of the room, where he'd been quietly organizing equipment. "Well, that was unexpected," he said. "Morgan doesn't usually allow freshmen in the research lab, much less grant them independent access." "Is that good or bad?" Abby asked, studying the authorization note. "Depends on whether you can live up to his expectations." Jason shouldered his backpack. "Lab's in the basement. I'll be there from 1 to 5 tomorrow if you want to bring your contraption by." The rest of Abby's day passed in a blur of introductory classes, none as stimulating as Dr. Morgan's physics lecture. By evening, she'd returned to her attic room exhausted but cautiously optimistic. Dr. Morgan's interest in her work represented the first validation she'd received from an actual scientist, not just high school teachers or competition judges. Over a simple dinner of ramen noodles enhanced with vegetables from her family's farm, Abby called her parents to report on her first day. Her mother's voice was tired but warm. "Your father's still in the fields," she explained. "Harvest is running behind with the early frost. How's the college?" "Small," Abby admitted, "but my physics professor seems interested in my research. He wants to see my particle detector tomorrow." "That's nice, honey," her mother said, obviously missing the significance. "Just be careful with your father's truck. We need it back by Thursday for the grain delivery. Actually, Mom, I was hoping to have Jason, he's the lab technician, drive me home this weekend to get the main detector components. They're too bulky for the truck." A pause. "Who's Jason?" "Just a student who works in the physics lab," Abby explained, feeling her face warm for no logical reason. "Senior year seems nice enough. Well, I suppose that would be all right, but you'll need to help with chores while you're here. Your brother's taken on your share, and it's wearing him thin." Guilt nagged at Abby as she ended the call. Her pursuit of education meant additional burden on her family, especially her 16-year-old brother, who already resented the unfair distribution of responsibilities. Her father had never said it directly, but she knew he considered her scientific aspirations a distraction from practical matters, keeping the family farm operational amid rising costs and falling crop prices. The next afternoon, Abby arrived at the basement laboratory with her laptop and the portable components of her detector. The space was considerably smaller than she'd imagined, just a converted storage room with outdated equipment and fluorescent lighting that buzzed incessantly. Jason looked up from a circuit board he was soldering and grinned. "Welcome to the Palace of Science." Abby searched for a diplomatic word. "A closet with delusions of grandeur," Jason supplied, "but it's our closet. What did you bring?" She unpacked her components, arranging them on a workspace. "This is the control unit and data logger. The actual sensors are still at the farm, too big to transport in my dad's truck." Jason examined her work with genuine interest, asking questions about her design choices and programming solutions. Unlike the elite university reviewers, he seemed impressed rather than dismissive of her improvised approach. "This is seriously cool," he said, inspecting the circuit board she had adapted from an old radio. "Morgan's going to flip when he sees this. Speaking of which," he checked his watch, "he should be here any minute for the weekly research meeting." "Meeting?" "Just me and him normally. We review ongoing projects, plan equipment maintenance, complain about budget constraints, the usual academic fun." Jason's smile was infectious. Consider yourself initiated into the thrilling world of underfunded scientific research. Dr. Morgan arrived precisely at 3:15, carrying a stack of journals and a thermos of coffee. He nodded to Abby before setting his materials on a desk and approaching her workstation. "This is your design?" he asked, immediately focusing on her equipment. "Part of it," Abby confirmed. "The main sensor array is still at my family's farm. This is the control unit and data processing system." For the next hour, Dr. Morgan interrogated her about every aspect of her design, pointing out potential improvements, but also acknowledging the ingenuity of her solutions. His questions were probing but respectful, treating her work with the seriousness of genuine scientific inquiry rather than as a student project. "The fundamental concept is sound," he concluded finally. "Your calibration methods are unorthodox but surprisingly effective. With proper equipment and institutional support, this design could yield publication-worthy data." Publication. The word hung in the air like an impossible dream. "However," Dr. Morgan continued, "we need to see the complete system. Jason, can you drive Ms. Parker to her family's property this weekend to retrieve the remaining components?" "Already arranged," Jason replied with a quick glance at Abby. "Saturday morning work for you, Dr. M?" "I'll meet you here at 8, the professor confirmed. "Ms. Parker, prepare documentation explaining your methodology for installing the sensors. We'll need to replicate your setup precisely." After Dr. Morgan left, Abby found herself overwhelmed by the sudden acceleration of events. "He wants to recreate my entire system here?" "Looks that way," Jason agreed, helping her pack up her components. "Morgan doesn't do things halfway. If he thinks your research has merit, he'll pursue it aggressively." "But why? Cedar Falls Community College isn't exactly a research institution." Jason's expression grew more serious. "You don't know much about Morgan, do you? Only that he teaches most of the physics and astronomy courses. Dr. Daniel Morgan was a senior research scientist at Goddard Space Flight Center for 15 years, Jason explained. Published in all the major journals, worked on multiple satellite projects. He was on track to lead the Solar Observation Division. What happened? 3 years ago, his wife was diagnosed with late-stage cancer. He resigned from NASA to bring her back to her hometown, here, for her final months. After she died, he just stayed, took the teaching position at CFCC because they desperately needed a physics instructor. That's... Abby struggled to find words. Tragic, noble, a massive waste of scientific talent. Jason shrugged. Maybe all three, but he's still connected to the scientific community. His recommendations carry weight. As they finished organizing the lab, Jason mentioned casually, "The fall meteor shower peaks this weekend. There's a field about 20 minutes from campus where a few astronomy enthusiasts gather to watch. Clear skies forecast for Saturday night. If you're interested." "I'd like that," Abby replied, surprised by how much she meant it. Between Dr. Morgan's unexpected support and Jason's friendly presence, Cedar Falls was beginning to feel less like a consolation prize and more like an actual opportunity. Saturday morning came with ideal autumn weather. Clear skies and cool temperatures perfect for transporting sensitive equipment. Jason arrived at the boarding house in an aged Subaru wagon, its back seats folded down to create cargo space. Dr. Morgan followed in his own vehicle, a practical sedan filled with additional monitoring equipment he'd borrowed from the college's limited resources. The 2-hour drive to Meadow Creek passed quickly as Jason and Abby discovered shared interests beyond physics. Both loved science fiction, particularly the works of Octavia Butler and Ted Chiang, and both had grown up in rural settings, far from the scientific institutions they aspired to join. "My dad's a mechanic," Jason explained, as they turned onto the gravel road leading to the Parker farm. "He wanted me to take over the family business. Couldn't understand why I'd waste time on theoretical physics when I could be making real money fixing engines." At least fixing engines has practical value, Abby replied. Try explaining to a struggling farmer why studying solar radiation matters when corn prices are falling and equipment keeps breaking down. The Parker farm came into view. A modest house with peeling white paint, several outbuildings in various states of repair, and fields of harvested corn stretching to the horizon. A teenage boy was repairing a fence near the driveway, his expression darkening when he spotted Abby in the passenger seat. That's my brother Ethan, Abby explained as they parked. He's not thrilled with me being away at college while he handles my chores. Dr. Morgan parked behind them, emerging with a notebook, already in hand. This is your observation site? The equipment is distributed across the property, Abby explained, leading them toward the largest barn. The main control unit is set up in the loft. They entered the barn, climbing a wooden ladder to the hayloft that Abby had converted into a makeshift laboratory. A tarp protected the equipment from dust and moisture, and extension cords ran in organized bundles to a power strip connected to the barn's single outlet. Dr. Morgan surveyed the setup with undisguised admiration. You accomplished all this with salvaged components? And parts ordered online when I could afford them, Abby confirmed, unveiling her creation, a complex arrangement of sensors, old computer parts, and custom-built circuit boards arranged on a wooden platform with precise alignment markers. The directional array is calibrated to track solar movement, she explained, pointing to a motorized component. I programmed it to adjust automatically based on astronomical data. The particle detection grid covers 3 separate wavelengths. And there's a basic spectrographic analysis component I added last spring. Jason whistled softly. You built all this yourself? In a barn? Where else was I going to build it? Abby asked, genuinely confused by his amazement. Dr. Morgan was examining her handwritten observation logs with growing interest. These readings correlate with official solar observation data from professional observatories, he noted. Your calibration methodology is unconventional but effective. I had to improvise, Abby shrugged. I couldn't exactly order professional-grade calibration tools. As they carefully disassembled the system for transport, Abby's father appeared in the barn doorway. John Parker was a weathered man in his early 50s, with calloused hands and permanent worry lines etched around his eyes. Abigail, he called up to the loft. Your mother says you're taking your science project to school. Yes, Dad. This is Dr. Morgan, my physics professor, and Jason, the lab technician. They're helping me continue my research at college. Her father climbed partway up the ladder, surveying the dismantled equipment with a mixture of pride and concern. That contraption better not be distracting you from your studies. Actually, Mr. Parker, Dr. Morgan interjected, your daughter's contraption is the most impressive piece of independent scientific research I've seen from an undergraduate in 20 years. It's precisely why she should be pursuing her studies. John Parker seemed taken aback by the professor's directness. Well, he said finally, just make sure it comes back in one piece if you're done with it. Cost a fortune in electric bills. As her father descended the ladder, Abby felt the familiar mixture of disappointment and understanding. He wasn't being deliberately unsupportive. He simply couldn't afford to encourage dreams that seemed impractical in the face of their financial reality. By early afternoon, they had carefully loaded the entire system into the 2 vehicles. Abby promised her mother she'd return in 2 weeks to help with the last of the harvest preparations, endured her brother's sullen farewell, and received an awkward but affectionate pat on the shoulder from her father. Your family seems nice, Jason offered as they drove away. Just a little practical, Abby supplied. They're practical people facing practical problems. Astrophysics doesn't put food on the table or pay equipment loans. Neither does teaching physics at a community college, Dr. Morgan commented from the car behind them, speaking through the open window during a stop sign. But some pursuits have value beyond immediate practical application. As they pulled away from the farm, Abby watched her family's land recede in the side mirror, the only home she'd ever known becoming smaller with distance, yet somehow less overwhelming than it had always felt up close. Ahead lay Cedar Falls, Dr. Morgan's lab, and the possibility that her work might finally receive the serious consideration she'd always hoped for. "Still up for the meteor shower tonight?" Jason asked as they neared the halfway point of their journey. "Definitely," Abby replied, suddenly eager for the simple pleasure of stargazing without data collection or research objectives. Just the pure appreciation of cosmic wonder that had first drawn her to astronomy as a child. The universe had always been her escape from the limited horizons of Meadow Creek. Now, paradoxically, it seemed to be providing a path back to a wider world she'd feared was permanently closed to her after those devastating rejection letters. The equipment nestled safely behind her represented not just years of solitary work, but a tangible connection to possibilities that extended far beyond. Cedar Falls Community College. The meteor shower exceeded all expectations. Abby lay on a blanket beside Jason in an open field, 10 miles from campus, watching the Orionids streak across the night sky in brilliant flashes. Around them, a small gathering of astronomy enthusiasts had set up telescopes and cameras, but Abby preferred the unfiltered view, just her eyes and the cosmos, the way she'd first fallen in love with astronomy as a child. "That was at least a -3 magnitude," Jason commented, as a particularly bright meteor left a lingering trail. "Probably a piece of Halley's Comet debris." "Technically, all Orionids are Halley's debris," Abby pointed out. "The comet's been shedding material for thousands of years." "True," Jason conceded, "but some pieces are older than others. The really bright ones tend to be from more recent passages." Their conversation flowed easily throughout the evening, moving from celestial mechanics to quantum theory to mundane topics like favorite breakfast cereals and worst high school memories. By the time they returned to Mrs. Winter's boarding house, Abby realized she'd made her first genuine friend at Cedar Falls. "Thanks for today," she said as Jason's car idled in front of the Victorian house. "Both the farm trip and the meteor shower. Thanks for letting me see your work," he replied, "and for not being like the typical freshman who thinks they know everything." "Oh, I know everything," Abby deadpanned. "I just hide it well." Jason laughed. "See you Monday at the lab. Morgan wants to start calibrating your system right away. Creating and narrating this story takes us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us." Now back to the story. Reassembling Abby's particle detector in the basement lab proved more challenging than anticipated. The system had been designed specifically for the barn loft, with its particular dimensions and power supply. Adapting it to the lab's confined space required creativity and compromise. "The directional array needs a wider range of motion," Abby explained, adjusting the motorized platform that tracked solar movement. "The basement windows limit our observation angles." Dr. Morgan studied the problem, then disappeared without explanation. He returned 30 minutes later with a maintenance worker who carried a toolbox and a skeptical expression. "We need a roof access point," Dr. Morgan informed them. "Mr. Jennings here is going to help us create one." "Dr. Morgan, I can't just cut holes in the building," the maintenance man protested. "There are procedures, approvals, all handled." Dr. Morgan interrupted, producing a document with the college president's signature. "Administrative approval for a scientific observation port. We're authorized to modify this space for research purposes." By Wednesday afternoon, they had installed a weather-sealed observation port in the ceiling of the lab, with a removable cover that allowed Abby's equipment to collect data from the roof. The system's central components remained in the lab, connected by cables that ran through the new opening. "Initial calibration looks promising," Jason reported, comparing readings from Abby's sensors with published solar activity data. We're within acceptable margins of error compared to professional equipment. Not good enough, Dr. Morgan declared, studying the output on Abby's laptop. Ms. Parker, what adjustments would improve accuracy? The particle detection grid needs finer tuning, she suggested after careful consideration. And we could modify the spectrographic component to account for atmospheric variances specific to this location. Make it happen. Dr. Morgan nodded. Use whatever lab resources you need. For the next 2 weeks, Abby divided her time between classes and the basement lab, often working late into the evening. Her other coursework remained important, but the particle detector project had become her primary focus, particularly after Dr. Morgan revealed his true intentions. I've submitted an abstract to the American Physical Society, he announced one afternoon, sliding a printed document across the workbench. If accepted, we'll present your research at their spring conference. Abby stared at the paper, her name listed as co-author alongside Dr. Morgan's. You're submitting my work to a professional scientific society? Our work, he corrected. I've contributed to the methodology refinement and provided theoretical context, but the fundamental design and original data collection are entirely yours. This collaboration merits joint publication. Publication in a peer-reviewed scientific journal had been a distant dream, something Abby had imagined might happen in graduate school if she were fortunate. Having this opportunity as a community college freshman seemed impossible. What are the chances they'll accept it? She asked. Cautiously, ordinarily minimal, Dr. Morgan admitted. The APS rarely accepts undergraduate research, especially from community colleges. However, he adjusted his glasses, I have certain connections from my Goddard days, and your work has genuine merit. I estimate a 30% chance of acceptance. 30% didn't sound promising, but it was infinitely better than the 0% she'd assumed. What do we need to do? Refine the calibration, expand the data set, and prepare a compelling presentation. Which reminds me, he pulled another document from his folder. You need a proper lab coat. The department has a minimal budget for research assistants. Abby examined the document, an official appointment as undergraduate research assistant with a modest stipend of $150 monthly. It wouldn't cover much, but it would help with her textbook expenses and reduce the pressure. To find weekend work. I don't know what to say, she managed, overwhelmed by this unexpected development. Say you'll have the calibration improvements completed by Friday, Dr. Morgan replied pragmatically. The submission deadline is next Wednesday. October gave way to November, bringing colder temperatures and the first snowfall of the season. Abby's weekly visits home became more challenging with road conditions deteriorating, but her family had grown more supportive as news of her research appointment spread through Meadow Creek. Even her brother's resentment had softened somewhat, replaced by grudging respect when his friends expressed amazement that his sister was doing real science with NASA technology. The NASA connection was a wild exaggeration of Dr. Morgan's former employment, but Abby didn't correct the misconception. It provided a framework her family could understand, something more concrete than abstract discussions of particle physics and solar radiation. The abstract submission process completed, Abby expected the project to enter a quiet phase, while they awaited the APS response. Instead, Dr. Morgan intensified their efforts, pushing for improvements to the system and expansion of their data collection methodology. We need to demonstrate ongoing research progression, he explained, adding yet another component to their increasingly complex apparatus. If the abstract is accepted, we'll need substantial results to present. If it's rejected, we'll strengthen our submission for the next conference cycle. His determination was both inspiring and exhausting. Abby found herself spending every available hour in the lab, sometimes sleeping on the old couch Dr. Morgan had salvaged from a faculty lounge renovation. Her other coursework remained strong, but increasingly felt like an obligation rather than a focus. Jason became an essential part of the project, contributing technical expertise and practical solutions to implementation challenges. His senior research requirements dovetailed neatly with their work, creating a seamless collaboration that extended beyond the formal lab hours. "You should apply to transfer next fall," he suggested one evening as they recalibrated sensors. "With Morgan's recommendation and our research progress, you'd have a solid shot at Iowa State's physics program." "That was the original plan," Abby acknowledged, making minute adjustments to the directional array. "Though I was thinking more about University of Iowa. Their astronomy department has better funding." "Think bigger," Jason urged. "With this, a project and Morgan backing you, you could aim for top-tier programs, maybe even MIT reconsider." Abby appreciated his optimism but remained pragmatic. One research project, even with a former NASA scientist's endorsement, wouldn't erase the fundamental issues that had led to her rejections. Geographic disadvantage, lack of advanced laboratory experience, and financial limitations would still factor into any application. Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Morgan's arrival, unusual for a Friday evening when he typically left early for dinner with friends from the English department. "We've received a response from APS," he announced, without preamble, his expression unreadable. "They've reviewed our abstract." Abby's heart sank. His serious demeanor suggested rejection. "And?" Jason prompted when Dr. Morgan didn't immediately continue. "And they're intrigued," he said finally, allowing a rare smile. "They've requested a full paper for consideration, not just the conference presentation. Apparently, your methodology for achieving high-resolution measurements with low-cost equipment has caught their attention." Abby stared at him, processing this information. "They want a full scientific paper? From us?" "From us," Dr. Morgan confirmed. "Specifically, they're interested in how your approach might be adapted for educational settings with limited resources. There's potential broader impact beyond the specific solar radiation findings." Jason whooped and lifted Abby in an impulsive hug before quickly setting her down, both of them flushing with embarrassment. Dr. Morgan pretended not to notice as he continued outlining the paper requirements and submission timeline. "This is real, isn't it?" Abby asked quietly when Jason stepped away to check a sensor reading. "Not just a college project or a theoretical exercise." "It's entirely real," Dr. Morgan assured her. "Your work has legitimate scientific merit. I wouldn't have submitted it otherwise." The validation was overwhelming. After years of working in isolation, after the crushing disappointment of university rejections, after adjusting her expectations to the limited horizons of a community college, here was confirmation that her science mattered, that she belonged in the scientific community regardless of her rural background or lack of prestigious institutional affiliation. December arrived with increasing academic pressure as final exams approached. Abby maintained her position at the top of all her classes while simultaneously drafting sections of their APS paper. The workload was grueling but purposeful, giving her a focus that transformed exhaustion into productive energy. The last day of the semester brought unexpected news from an unlikely source. Mrs. Winters, normally reserved to the point of aloofness, called Abby into her private sitting room after breakfast. "You've had a telephone call," the elderly landlady informed her, indicating her ancient rotary phone. "From someone at NASA. I took a message." She handed Abby a notepad with meticulous handwriting. The note was brief. "Dr. Elena Vasquez, NASA, Goddard Space Flight Center, requests return call regarding Parker Morgan research. Urgent." Abby stared at the message, certain there had been a mistake. "Did she specifically ask for me? Not Dr. Morgan?" "Young lady, I may be old, but I'm not confused," Mrs. Winters replied with unexpected sharpness. The woman asked for Abigail Parker, regarding the innovative particle detection system. Those were her exact words. With trembling fingers, Abby dialed the number from Mrs. Winters' telephone. After 2 rings, a professional female voice answered. Dr. Vasquez speaking. This is Abigail Parker returning your call, Abby managed, her voice steadier than she felt, from Cedar Falls Community College. Ms. Parker, thank you for calling back promptly. The woman's tone was brisk but not unfriendly. I've been reviewing the paper you and Dr. Morgan submitted to APS. Your approach to high-resolution particle detection using low-cost components is quite innovative. Thank you, Abby replied, unsure what else to say. How had a NASA scientist seen their paper before it was even published? As if reading her thoughts, Dr. Vasquez continued. I serve on the APS review committee this year. Your submission was forwarded to me, given my specialization in solar radiation monitoring. I'd like to discuss your methodology in more detail, particularly the potential applications for citizen science initiatives. Of course, Abby agreed, still stunned by this development. Though Dr. Morgan would be better qualified to discuss the theoretical. I've already spoken with Daniel, Dr. Vasquez interrupted. He explained that the fundamental design and initial implementation were entirely your work. That's remarkably impressive for a student at any level, let alone a first-year undergraduate. The conversation continued for nearly 20 minutes, with Dr. Vasquez asking detailed technical questions about Abby's design choices, data validation methods, and potential modifications for different atmospheric conditions. By the end, Abby had received an invitation to visit Goddard Space Flight Center during winter break. We have an educational outreach program that might benefit from your perspective, Dr. Vasquez explained. And I'd like to show you our solar observation facilities. Daniel mentioned you're considering transfer applications for next fall. A recommendation from our department could help your prospects. After the call ended, Abby sat motionless in Mrs. Winters' sitting room, trying to process what had just happened. A leading NASA scientist had called her, not Dr. Morgan, to discuss her research, had invited her to visit one of the nation's premier space science facilities, had casually offered a recommendation that could transform her academic future. Good news, I presume, Mrs. Winters asked, returning with 2 cups of tea. Very good news, Abby confirmed, accepting the unexpected offering, though slightly overwhelming. Mrs. Winters settled into her armchair with surprising grace for a woman her age. I've observed many students come through my boarding house over 30 years, she remarked, stirring her tea methodically. Most are merely passing through, treating their education as a transaction, credits earned, degree obtained, move on. She fixed Abby with a perceptive gaze. You're different. You pursue knowledge with genuine passion. It's refreshing to witness. Coming from the typically reserved landlady, this observation felt like high praise. Thank you, Mrs. Winters. My late husband was a physicist, the older woman continued, surprising Abby further. Taught at University of Chicago for 40 years. He would have appreciated your dedication. This revelation cast Mrs. Winters in an entirely new light. Not just a strict landlady, but someone who understood academic pursuits and scientific endeavors from personal experience. I had no idea, Abby admitted. No reason you should. Mrs. Winters sipped her tea. The point is, recognize this moment for what it is, not just personal validation, but an opening door. Be prepared to walk through it decisively. Abby left the sitting room with a renewed sense of purpose, immediately heading to the physics lab to share the news with Dr. Morgan and Jason. The NASA connection represented more than professional recognition. It was tangible evidence that her work had value beyond the confines of Cedar Falls Community College. As the first semester of her college experience drew to a close, Abby reflected on how dramatically her circumstances had changed in just 4 months, from the devastation of elite university rejections to collaboration with a former NASA scientist, from isolation in her barn loft laboratory to an invitation to visit Goddard Space Flight Center, from limited horizons to expanding possibilities. That evening, she called her parents with the news about NASA's interest in her research. For the first time, her father asked detailed questions about her work, showing genuine curiosity rather than polite acknowledgement. "This NASA visit," he said thoughtfully, "sounds like it could lead to real opportunities." "It could," Abby agreed cautiously, unwilling to overstate the possibilities. "Your mother and I have been talking," he continued. "We might be able to help more with your education expenses next year. The farm had a better harvest than expected, and your brother received a partial baseball scholarship to Iowa State." The offer stunned Abby. Her family's financial situation hadn't fundamentally changed, yet they were reprioritizing limited resources to support her scientific aspirations. "Dad, that's generous, but you don't need to." "Yes, we do," he interrupted, firmly. "We didn't fully understand what you were working toward. Now we do. Family supports family, especially when they're reaching for something important." As winter break approached, bringing with it the anticipated NASA visit and continued work on their research paper, Abby recognized that her journey had already defied expectations. The rejection letters that had once seemed to define her future now appeared merely as detours rather than dead ends. The path forward remained challenging and uncertain, but no longer felt impossible. Cedar Falls Community College, initially her last resort, had become the unexpected launching pad for scientific recognition that the prestigious universities had refused to provide. The Goddard Space Flight Center sprawled across its Maryland campus like a small city dedicated to space science. Abby pressed her face against the car window as Dr. Morgan drove through the security checkpoint, taking in the complex of buildings where humanity's greatest space missions were designed and monitored. "Nervous?" Dr. Morgan asked, glancing at her with amusement. "Terrified," Abby admitted. "What if Dr. Vasquez realizes I'm just a farm girl playing with homemade equipment? What if this whole thing is a massive misunderstanding?" "That," Dr. Morgan said firmly, "is imposter syndrome talking. Dr. Vasquez has reviewed your work thoroughly. She knows exactly who you are and what you've accomplished." They parked outside the visitor center where Dr. Vasquez had arranged to meet them. The winter air held a sharp bite as they exited the car, far different from the dry cold of Iowa. Abby adjusted her only professional outfit, black slacks and a button-down shirt, borrowed from Mrs. Winter's niece, paired with her own worn boots, that she'd polished to a respectable shine. Dr. Elena Vasquez proved to be younger than Abby had imagined from their phone conversation, perhaps early 40s, with dark hair pulled into a practical bun and a brisk, efficient manner that somehow remained approachable. She greeted Dr. Morgan with the easy familiarity of former colleagues before turning her full attention to Abby. "Ms. Parker, welcome to Goddard," she said, shaking Abby's hand firmly. "I'm looking forward to discussing your work in detail. Your approach to particle detection shows remarkable ingenuity." The next 6 hours passed in a whirlwind of activity. Dr. Vasquez led them through various departments, introducing Abby to scientists and engineers who asked thoughtful questions about her equipment design. Unlike the dismissive tone of university admission committees, these professionals treated her work with genuine respect, focusing on her innovative solutions rather than the limitations of her resources. "Your calibration method using synchronized smartphones is particularly clever," commented Dr. Harrington, a solar physicist who'd been studying coronal mass ejections for 20 years. "Have you considered adapting it for atmospheric research?" "Not specifically," Abby replied, gaining confidence with each conversation, "though the basic principles should transfer to any phenomenon requiring distributed measurement points." After Lunch in the cafeteria, where Abby found herself engaged in animated conversation with two young engineers about the potential for miniaturized detection systems. Dr. Vasquez led them to her personal laboratory. "This," she explained, gesturing to an impressive array of equipment, "is our prototype for the next-generation solar particle detection system. It costs approximately $3.7 million and requires a team of 12 specialists to operate." Abby stared at the gleaming instruments, more advanced than anything she'd ever seen outside of scientific journals. "And this," Dr. Vasquez continued, leading them to a side workbench, "is our attempt to recreate your detector using your documented specifications." There on the bench sat a remarkably accurate reproduction of Abby's homemade system. The components were newer and the construction more refined, but the fundamental design was unmistakably hers. "You rebuilt my detector?" Abby asked, stunned. "We did, and here's the fascinating part." Dr. Vasquez pulled up a computer display showing comparative data. "In certain specific measurements, particularly in the lower electromagnetic spectrum, your design actually outperforms our standard equipment. The cost difference is approximately 1/1000, which makes this extremely significant for distributed scientific networks." Dr. Morgan stepped forward, examining the comparison data with professional interest. "The sensitivity in the radio frequency range is particularly impressive. Abby's adaptation of ham radio components creates an unexpected advantage." "Precisely," Dr. Vasquez agreed, "which brings me to the purpose of this invitation." She turned to Abby. "NASA's Science Mission Directorate has an educational outreach initiative focused on expanding access to scientific instrumentation in underserved communities. Your detector design presents a potentially transformative case study." Abby listened intently as Dr. Vasquez outlined a proposal. NASA would provide funding to refine and document her detector design for educational implementation. The project would include summer internship positions for both Abby and Jason, working directly with Goddard scientists to develop teaching materials and construction guidelines. "The goal," Dr. Vasquez explained, "is to create an affordable, reproducible system that high school and community college students can build themselves, allowing meaningful participation in actual scientific data collection." "You want to mass-produce my particle detector?" Abby asked, struggling to comprehend the scale of what was being proposed. "Not mass-produce exactly," Dr. Vasquez clarified. "We want to create detailed open-source plans that any school with basic resources could implement. Your name would be credited as the original designer, of course, and you would maintain intellectual property rights for any commercial applications." The conversation continued into technical details, funding mechanisms, timeline expectations, documentation requirements. By the time they concluded the formal meeting, Abby's head was spinning with possibilities that had seemed inconceivable just months earlier. "There's one more thing," Dr. Vasquez said as they prepared to leave. "I've taken the liberty of forwarding your application materials to colleagues at several universities, including MIT's admissions committee. With your permission, I'd like to send them updated information about this project and your continuing research." Abby exchanged a startled glance with Dr. Morgan. "My permission? Of course, but why would MIT reconsider my application?" "Because circumstances have changed," Dr. Vasquez stated matter-of-factly. "Your work has now been validated by NASA scientists and accepted for publication by the American Physical Society. Those are significant credentials that weren't present in your original application." The drive back to their hotel was quiet, both Abby and Dr. Morgan processing the implications of the day's discussions. Finally, Abby broke the silence. "This doesn't feel real," she admitted. 6 months ago, I was being rejected by every university I applied to. Now NASA wants to develop my design, and Dr. Vasquez is talking to MIT on my behalf. Science is fundamentally meritocratic, Dr. Morgan replied. Politics and prejudice can delay recognition, but genuine innovation eventually finds its audience. Your detector design is genuinely innovative, Abby. That's not flattery, it's professional assessment. That night, alone in her hotel room, Abby called her parents with the news. Her father's response was subdued but supportive. Practical concerns about the internship logistics balanced with unmistakable pride in her accomplishment. Her mother was more openly enthusiastic, particularly about the potential for university. Reconsideration, MIT, she repeated, the word carrying all the weight of impossible dreams. Your grandfather would have been so proud. He always said you had a special mind. Abby's grandfather had been her earliest scientific influence, a self-educated man who taught himself engineering principles while working as a mechanic. His improvised solutions to farm equipment problems had inspired her own approach to building scientific instruments with limited resources. He died when she was 12, but his practical creativity lived on in her work. I wouldn't be getting ahead of myself, Abby cautioned. Dr. Vasquez making inquiries doesn't guarantee anything. Of course not, her mother agreed, but it's a foot in the door that wasn't there before. Back at Cedar Falls for the spring semester, Abby found her status subtly altered. Word of the NASA connection had spread through the small campus, transforming her from an anonymous freshman into something of a minor celebrity. Students she'd never spoken to congratulated her in hallways. Professors who'd barely noticed her presence now engaged her in conversation after class. Dr. Morgan seemed amused by her discomfort with the attention. Better get used to it, he advised during a lab session. Scientific recognition comes with visibility. The upcoming APS conference will be considerably more intense. The American Physical Society conference was scheduled for April in Denver, where Abby and Dr. Morgan would present their research to an audience of professional physicists. The prospect was simultaneously thrilling and terrifying, an unprecedented opportunity that also carried the risk of public failure. Jason had thrown himself into the preparation work, helping refine their presentation materials while simultaneously completing his senior research requirements. His enthusiasm had only increased when Dr. Vasquez confirmed that his engineering contributions qualified him for the summer internship position. "We're going to be working at NASA," he reminded Abby at least once daily, his excitement never diminishing. Actual legitimate NASA, with badges and everything. February brought another unexpected development. Dr. Morgan called Abby into his office after class, his expression unusually solemn. "I've received a communication from MIT's Department of Physics," he began, sliding an official-looking letter across his desk. "Regarding your application status." Abby's heart hammered as she picked up the letter. The MIT letterhead seemed to shimmer before her eyes as she forced herself to focus on the content. "In light of recent developments and additional institutional recommendations, the admissions committee has reconsidered your application for the fall semester." She paused, scanning ahead through formal language to find the actual decision. "We are pleased to offer you admission to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology class of 2023 with a full tuition Chancellor's Science Scholarship." The words blurred as her eyes filled with unexpected tears. Full tuition. The scholarship would cover the otherwise insurmountable financial barrier that had made MIT an impossible dream, even if she'd been accepted initially. "Congratulations," Dr. Morgan said quietly. "It's well deserved." "I don't understand," Abby managed, still staring at the letter. "They rejected me. Definitively. What changed?" "You did," Dr. Morgan replied simply. "Or rather, the institutional perception of your work changed. NASA's interest provides external validation that elite universities respect. Dr. Vasquez's recommendation carries significant weight in academic circles. The acceptance created a complex emotional tangle. Elation at achieving what had seemed impossible, vindication after the painful rejections, but also uncertainty about leaving Cedar Falls, where she'd found unexpected opportunity and support. "I haven't decided if I'll accept," she told Jason later that day as they calibrated equipment in the lab. "Are you insane?" he demanded, nearly dropping a delicate sensor. "It's MIT with a full scholarship, of course you'll accept. But our research here will continue," he interrupted firmly. "Morgan and I can maintain the baseline work while you're establishing yourself at MIT. The NASA internship this summer gives us 3 months to document everything properly. This lab isn't going anywhere." Abby hesitated, reluctant to articulate her deeper concern. What about us? The question hung in the air between them. Their relationship had evolved beyond professional collaboration or simple friendship, though neither had explicitly defined its changing nature. Jason set down his tools and faced her directly. "MIT is a 21-hour drive from Cedar Falls," he said matter-of-factly. "Approximately 200 miles. A challenging distance for a relationship, but not insurmountable with proper planning and communication strategies." "You've researched this," Abby noted, fighting a smile. "I researched it the day after the Goddard visit," he admitted. "When I realized NASA might change your trajectory, I believe in preparing for probable scenarios. And us maintaining a long-distance relationship seemed probable. It seemed essential," he corrected, his typical humor giving way to rare seriousness. "At least from my perspective." The moment was interrupted by Dr. Morgan's arrival, bringing preliminary feedback on their APS paper from peer reviewers. The personal conversation was set aside for scientific matters, but Abby felt a new certainty solidifying within her. MIT represented a tremendous opportunity, but it didn't have to mean abandoning the connections she'd formed at Cedar Falls. March brought college acceptance letters for many Cedar Falls students planning to transfer to 4-year institutions. Abby watched her classmates celebrate admissions to state universities and regional colleges, their achievements significant in their own contexts. Her MIT acceptance remained private knowledge, shared only with family, Dr. Morgan and Jason, not from shame, but from awareness of how it might appear to others still fighting for educational opportunities. Mrs. Winters, however, seemed to have intuited the development. "When does MIT's term begin?" she asked casually one morning as Abby prepared to leave for class. "I haven't decided if I'm going," Abby replied, startled by the landlady's perception. Mrs. Winters fixed her with a knowing look. "My dear, some opportunities are not merely personal achievements. They're obligations to everyone who might follow your path. Consider that before you decide." The cryptic advice lingered as Abby walked to campus. Mrs. Winters had a point. Her journey from farm workshop to NASA collaboration represented more than individual success. It potentially created a template for other rural students with scientific aspirations but limited resources. The article about their research was published in the APS Journal the following week, with Abby's name appearing as co-author alongside Dr. Morgan's. Seeing her work in print, formatted with the professional layout of a scientific publication, brought a surreal sense of accomplishment. The accompanying editorial highlighted the project's significance for democratizing scientific participation, exactly the aspect that had captured NASA's interest. As April approached, bringing the APS conference with it, Abby finally reached her decision about MIT. The acceptance deadline loomed just days after the conference, requiring a definitive commitment. "I'm going," she told Dr. Morgan during their final presentation rehearsal. "To MIT, I mean. I've decided to accept their offer." He nodded, unsurprised. "A logical choice, though I admit Cedar Falls Community College will be diminished by your absence. I'll be back for the NASA project this summer," she reminded him. "And I've been thinking about maintaining a research connection even after transferring. The distributed sensor network we've discussed could include an MIT node and a Cedar Falls node, creating an expanded data collection system." Dr. Morgan's eyes lit with genuine interest. An intriguing proposal. It would provide valuable experience in remote scientific collaboration for students at both institutions. The conference preparation occupied most of their attention in the days that followed, but the MIT decision brought a sense of clarity. Abby's educational path now had direction and institutional support, transforming what had once seemed an impossible aspiration into an achievable goal. The night before their departure for Denver, Abby found herself back at the same field where she and Jason had watched the meteor shower months earlier. This time they were alone, lying on a blanket beneath a sky brilliant with stars, discussing everything and nothing as the hours slipped by. "I've been thinking about what Mrs. Winters said," Abby mused, watching her breath form small clouds in the cool spring air. "About my MIT acceptance being an obligation, not just an opportunity." "Heavy perspective," Jason commented, his shoulder warm against hers. "Though accurate in its way, your journey does create a precedent." "For what? Farm kids with scientific aspirations. For talented individuals whose circumstances don't match traditional academic expectations," he clarified. "The rural background, the resource limitations, the community college pathway, these shouldn't be barriers to scientific contribution." Abby considered this thoughtfully. "I didn't set out to become some kind of example. The best examples rarely do," Jason replied. "They just pursue excellence in their chosen field without allowing circumstances to define their limitations." They fell silent, contemplating the vast cosmic perspective above them. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the Shadish conference presentation, the formal MIT acceptance, the beginning of detailed planning for the NASA summer project. But tonight was for acknowledging the journey already traveled, from rejection and disappointment to validation and opportunity. "Whatever happens in Denver," Jason said quietly, "remember that your work has already succeeded where it matters most. You've created something genuinely valuable to the scientific community." Abby turned her head to study his profile against the starlit sky. "We created something valuable," she corrected. "I might have started alone in a barn loft, but the work that's being recognized came from collaboration, with you, with Dr. Morgan, with everyone who contributed to improving the original design." Jason smiled, still gazing upward. "The Parker-Morgan-Mitchell imparticle detector doesn't have quite the same ring to it." "Maybe not," Abby agreed, returning her attention to the stars. "But it's more accurate. The universe stretched endlessly above them, the same cosmic vista that had inspired her curiosity since childhood." The path from Meadow Creek Farm to NASA collaboration had been neither direct nor easy, but it had led to this moment of extraordinary possibility. Poised between where she'd begun and where she might go next, with the vast potential of scientific discovery still unfolding before her, Denver welcomed the American Physical Society Conference with unusually mild spring weather, the Rocky Mountains providing a dramatic backdrop to the city's modern skyline. The convention center buzzed with activity as physicists from around the world gathered to share research, debate theories, and form collaborations across institutional boundaries. Abby stood in the massive registration hall, clutching her presenter badge with a mixture of awe and apprehension. The lanyard around her neck identified her as Abigail Parker, Cedar Falls Community College, placing her among representatives from Stanford, MIT, Cambridge, and other prestigious institutions. "Intimidating, isn't it?" Dr. Morgan commented. Adjusting his own badge. My first conference was equally overwhelming. Paris, 1998. I spent the entire first day hiding in corners, avoiding conversation. The admission surprised Abby. She couldn't imagine the confident, sometimes brusque professor hiding from anyone. How did you get over it? I presented my research, he replied simply. Once I was speaking about my actual work rather than attempting small talk, everything became easier. The science is what matters here, not institutional affiliations or academic pedigrees. Their presentation was scheduled for the second day, in a session focused on innovative instrumentation techniques. This gave Abby a full day to acclimate to the conference environment, attending other talks, and exploring the exhibition hall where scientific equipment manufacturers displayed their latest technologies. Ms. Parker, a voice interrupted her examination of a particularly impressive spectrometer. Abigail Parker from Cedar Falls. She turned to find a man in his early 30s with a Stanford University badge. Yes, that's me. Robert Chen, Stanford Physics Department. He extended his hand. I read your paper on the low-cost particle detection system. Fascinating adaptation of consumer electronics for scientific instrumentation. The conversation that followed was the first of many similar interactions throughout the day. Researchers from various institutions sought her out, asking detailed questions about her methodology and offering suggestions for potential improvements. Far from the dismissive treatment she'd feared, these established scientists engaged with her work on its merits, regardless of her community college affiliation. By evening, Abby's initial nervousness had transformed into cautious confidence. The presentation materials were prepared. Their methodology was sound, and the scientific community seemed genuinely interested in their work. She returned to the hotel room she shared with Dr. Morgan's wife, who had joined them for moral support, feeling prepared for tomorrow's challenge. "How are you holding up?" Mrs. Morgan asked, setting aside the novel she'd been reading. Linda. Morgan was a literature professor at a small liberal arts college near Cedar Falls, with a warmth that balanced her husband's occasional austerity. Better than expected, Abby admitted. People have been surprisingly supportive. Scientists generally care more about ideas than credentials, Linda observed. Once you're past the gatekeepers, merit tends to matter more than pedigree. The insight resonated with Abby's experience throughout the day. I wish university admissions worked the same way. Ironically, they were designed to, Linda replied. The earliest universities evaluated students based on demonstrated knowledge rather than preparatory education. Standardized requirements came later, ostensibly for consistency, but often reinforcing existing privileges. The conversation drifted to Linda's academic specialty, 19th-century women writers who had navigated similar barriers in their fields, providing a welcome distraction from tomorrow's presentation anxieties. Abby found herself relaxing in the older woman's company, grateful for her perspective on academic institutions and their often arbitrary barriers. Daniel believes in you completely, you know, Linda mentioned as they prepared for sleep. He rarely becomes this invested in a student's work. Your project has reignited his passion for scientific discovery. The comment added another dimension to Abby's understanding of her mentor. She'd seen Dr. Morgan's professional dedication, but hadn't fully appreciated how her work might have affected him personally. Morning arrived with clear skies and nervous energy. Abby reviewed her presentation notes over breakfast, mentally rehearsing key points, while Dr. Morgan discussed session logistics with colleagues he'd reconnected with the previous day. Their panel included 4 presentations on novel instrumentation. Approaches. Abby and Dr. Morgan were scheduled third, following discussions of advanced laboratory techniques that made their low-cost approach seem even more distinctive by contrast. As they entered the presentation room, Abby was startled to see Dr. Vasquez from NASA sitting in the second row, alongside several colleagues wearing Goddard identification badges. The NASA scientist offered an encouraging smile, but remained engaged in conversation with her team. "Deep breaths," Dr. Morgan advised as the session chair made introductions. "Remember, everyone here is genuinely interested in scientific advancement. They want you to succeed." The first two presentations proceeded smoothly. Technical discussions of high-precision measurement techniques using cutting-edge equipment. Audience questions focused on specific methodological details rather than challenging fundamental approaches, creating a collegial atmosphere that somewhat eased Abby's anxiety. Then the moderator announced, "Our next presentation, Distributed Particle Detection Using Modified Consumer Electronics by Abigail Parker and Dr. Daniel Morgan from Cedar Falls Community College." The moment Abby stepped to the podium, her nervousness transformed into focused determination. The faces watching her weren't threatening judges, but fellow scientists curious about her work. She launched into their presentation with clear, confident explanations of the detector's design principles, component adaptations, and calibration methodology. Dr. Morgan handled the theoretical sections, explaining how their approach could be replicated across distributed networks to create broader data collection capabilities at minimal cost. Their joint presentation flowed seamlessly between practical implementation and scientific implications, showcasing both the innovation of Abby's original design and the rigorous validation provided by Dr. Morgan's expertise. The question period that followed proved even more engaging than the presentation itself. Researchers from multiple institutions posed thoughtful inquiries about specific design elements, potential modifications for different environmental conditions and applications. Beyond solar radiation monitoring, have you considered adapting this approach for seismic monitoring networks? Asked a geophysicist from Caltech. The distributed sensor architecture seems potentially transferable. Could the smartphone synchronization method be applied to astronomical observations using consumer-grade telescopes? Inquired an astronomer from the University of Arizona. Each question expanded the potential applications of Abby's design philosophy, using accessible technology creatively to democratize scientific data collection. The session moderator eventually had to cut off questions to maintain the schedule, promising that the presenters would be available for continued discussion during the afternoon poster session. As they gathered their materials, Dr. Vasquez approached the podium. "Excellent presentation," she said warmly. "Several of my colleagues are interested in discussing potential citizen science applications. Would you both be available for dinner this evening?" The NASA dinner invitation extended their professional network even further. Seated around a large table at an upscale restaurant near the convention center, Abby found herself engaged in conversation with scientists from Goddard, JPL, and the NASA Education Outreach Division. These weren't mere courtesy discussions. The professionals genuinely wanted her input on making scientific instrumentation more accessible to educational institutions with limited resources. "The fundamental challenge," explained Dr. Kavita Sharma from NASA's Education Office, "is creating scientific experiences that are both authentic and achievable. Most schools can't afford standard laboratory equipment, but simplified educational versions often sacrifice too much functionality to provide meaningful results. That's why Abby's approach is so compelling," Dr. Vasquez added. "By repurposing consumer technology in creative ways, she's maintained scientific validity while dramatically reducing cost barriers. The key was focusing on the essential measurement requirements rather than mimicking commercial designs," Abby explained, surprised by her own confidence in this distinguished company. "Professional equipment often includes features beyond what's necessary for basic scientific observation." The conversation continued late into the evening, eventually resulting in a concrete proposal. Abby would document her design process in detail, creating an educational framework that NASA could distribute to schools nationwide. The summer internship would be expanded to include development of teaching materials and construction guides, optimized for classroom implementation. We're envisioning a nationwide network of student-built particle detectors, Dr. Sharma explained, sketching her concept. On a napkin, imagine science classrooms across the country contributing real data to actual NASA research projects through instruments they've constructed themselves. The vision aligned perfectly with Abby's own belief that scientific participation shouldn't be limited by geographic or economic circumstances. Her detector, born from necessity in an Iowa barn, might become the template for thousands of similar systems built by students facing similar resource constraints. By the conference's final day, Abby had accumulated a stack of business cards from researchers interested in collaboration, adaptation, or simply staying informed about her continuing work. Dr. Morgan observed the phenomenon with quiet satisfaction, occasionally steering particularly significant connections toward more detailed discussions of future possibilities. "The scientific community has recognized your potential," he commented, as they prepared for the closing plenary session. "Now you need to consider how to maximize it." The MIT acceptance deadline loomed just 2 days after their return to Cedar Falls. Though Abby had already decided to accept the offer, the conference experience had given her a clearer vision of how to leverage the opportunity. She wasn't simply transferring to an elite institution, she was bringing valuable experience and perspective that many traditionally tracked students lacked. On their final evening in Denver, Dr. Morgan invited Abby to join him and Linda for dinner at a small restaurant away from the conference venues. The setting was more intimate than previous meals, with soft lighting and quiet conversation replacing the energetic discussions of scientific gatherings. "We wanted to celebrate your success properly," Linda explained as they were seated, away from the professional context. "The conference exceeded all expectations," Dr. Morgan added, uncharacteristically effusive. "Your work has been recognized by the exact people who can help advance it further." Abby felt a surge of gratitude toward this unlikely pair who had supported her journey from struggling community college freshman to respected conference presenter in less than a year. "I couldn't have done any of this without your guidance," she acknowledged. "You saw potential where elite universities only saw limitations." "We saw what was already there," Linda corrected gently. "All Daniel did was provide the platform for others to see it too." Dr. Morgan cleared his throat, seemingly uncomfortable with the emotional turn in conversation. "We have something for you," he said, placing a small wrapped package on the table. "A token of our confidence in your future contributions." Abby unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a vintage brass compass in a wooden case. The instrument was clearly antique, its craftsmanship evident in the detailed engraving and precision mechanisms. "It belonged to my mentor at Stanford," Dr. Morgan explained. "He gave it to me when I received my first NASA appointment, saying that no matter where science took me, I should remember where I started. It seems appropriate to continue the tradition." The gesture touched Abby deeply. The compass represented not just recognition of her achievements, but inclusion in a legacy of scientific mentorship that transcended institutional boundaries. "I don't know what to say," she managed, tracing the compass's intricate details with her fingertip. "Say you'll continue asking important questions," Linda suggested, "and finding innovative ways to answer them. And perhaps," Dr. Morgan added, with unusual sentimentality, "that you'll remember Cedar Falls as more than just a detour on your journey." "It was never a detour," Abby replied firmly. "It was exactly where I needed to be." The flight back to Iowa provided time for reflection. As farmland replaced mountains outside the airplane window, Abby considered how dramatically her perspective had changed. The rural landscape below no longer represented limitation but possibility, evidence that meaningful scientific work could emerge from unlikely origins. Cedar Falls welcomed them back with typical Midwestern weather, overcast skies, and hints of early spring struggling through the remnants of winter. The campus seemed smaller somehow after the grand scale of the conference venues, its modest buildings a stark contrast to the facilities Abby would encounter at MIT in the fall. Jason was waiting at the airport, holding a handmade sign that read, APS Conference Superstars, with unnecessary but enthusiastic glitter. His familiar grin was a welcome sight after days among strangers. "So," he demanded as soon as they cleared the security area, "did you revolutionize physics? Are they naming particles after you yet?" "Not quite," Abby laughed, grateful for his ability to deflate pretension before it could take root. "But NASA wants to expand our summer project significantly." During the drive back to campus, Abby and Dr. Morgan took turns describing the conference highlights, professional connections, and expanded NASA collaboration. Jason listened intently, occasionally asking pointed questions about technical details or implementation challenges. "This is getting serious," he observed as they outlined the nationwide educational network concept. From a barn loft project to a national science initiative in less than a year. That's exponential growth, with corresponding complexity, Dr. Morgan noted. The documentation requirements alone will be substantial. We'll need to standardize construction methods while maintaining flexibility for different resource levels. The conversation continued in the physics lab, where they unpacked conference materials and began organizing notes for the expanded summer project. The basement room that had once seemed inadequate now felt like the birthplace of something significant, a genuine contribution to scientific education that transcended its humble origins. That evening, as Abby walked back to Mrs. Winter's boarding house, she composed her formal acceptance of MIT's offer on her phone. The carefully crafted message expressed gratitude for the opportunity while also clearly stating her intention to continue the NASA collaboration during summer months and maintain research connections with Cedar Falls Community College. Her finger hovered over the send button, this final commitment to a path that had once seemed impossible. The MIT opportunity represented everything she'd originally desired: prestigious education, advanced facilities, connections to the scientific establishment. Yet her time at Cedar Falls had revealed the value of alternative pathways and unexpected collaborations. She pressed send, simultaneously accepting both the elite education she'd always wanted and the responsibility to ensure that others like her, rural students with scientific aspirations, but limited resources, might find similar opportunities through the work she'd helped pioneer with NASA. Mrs. Winters was waiting on the porch swing when Abby arrived, a steaming mug of tea beside her despite the cool evening. "Welcome back," the elderly landlady greeted her. "I trust the conference was illuminating." "More than I could have imagined," Abby confirmed, accepting the landlady's gesture toward the empty space on the swing. "It's opened doors I didn't even know existed, including MIT, I understand." Mrs. Winters sipped her tea calmly. "You've made your decision?" "I just sent my acceptance," Abby admitted, unsurprised by the landlady's awareness of her situation. "It feels like the right next step, though leaving Cedar Falls will be harder than I expected." "Good places leave their mark on us," Mrs. Winters observed, "as do good people. Both become part of who we are, regardless of physical distance." They sat in comfortable silence as twilight deepened around them. From this quiet porch in a small Iowa town, Abby could now trace a clear path forward through NASA's summer program, to MIT's hallowed halls, carrying with her the lessons of resourcefulness and determination that had begun in a barn loft and flourished in a community college basement. The journey ahead would bring new challenges and opportunities, but she would face them with the confidence born from already overcoming significant obstacles. The rejection letters that had once seemed so devastating had ultimately redirected her toward unexpected validation and support, proof that setbacks could become advantages when leveraged properly. As stars began appearing in the darkening sky, the same stars that had first inspired her scientific curiosity as a child, Abby felt a deep certainty that she was exactly where she needed to be in her journey, poised between what had been accomplished and what remained possible. The NASA internship began on a sweltering June morning, the Maryland humidity pressing down like a physical weight as Abby and Jason navigated the Goddard Space Flight Center campus. Their temporary badges granted access to Building 34, where the Education Outreach Division had allocated laboratory space for their summer project. "I still can't believe we're actually here," Jason whispered as they followed a security escort through endless corridors. "Working for NASA with security clearances." "Lowest-level clearances," Abby reminded him, though she shared his barely contained excitement, were basically educated visitors. Their designated workspace proved considerably more impressive than Cedar Falls Basement Lab, a modern facility with gleaming equipment, dedicated computer stations, and large windows overlooking a wooded section of the campus. Dr. Vasquez was waiting for them, alongside two other scientists Abby recognized from the APS conference. "Welcome to Goddard," Dr. Vasquez greeted them. "Let me introduce Dr. Arjun Patel, our instrumentation specialist, and Dr. Mia Chen from Educational Implementation. They'll be your primary collaborators this summer." The following orientation consumed most of the day: security protocols, facility guidelines, project expectations, and bureaucratic paperwork that seemed endless. By late afternoon, Abby's head was spinning with NASA acronyms and procedural details. "Don't worry," Dr. Chen assured them as the formal orientation concluded. "Everyone feels overwhelmed their first week. Focus on the science, and the rest becomes background noise eventually." Their project had evolved significantly since the initial discussions. What had begun as simple documentation of Abby's detector design had expanded into development of a comprehensive educational framework. The Accessible Science Instrumentation Initiative, or ASII, pronounced easy, as Dr. Chen emphasized repeatedly. "We envision 3 implementation tiers," Dr. Vasquez explained, displaying a presentation slide showing progressive complexity levels: basic, intermediate, and advanced, each requiring different resource levels, but all contributing usable scientific data. The ambitious scope became clearer as they reviewed the summer timeline. Phase 1 would involve recreating and documenting Abby's original design with standardized components. Phase 2 would develop curriculum materials for educational implementation. Phase 3 would establish a data collection network connecting student-built detectors to NASA's Citizen Science Portal. The presentation generated immediate interest from multiple organizations. The NSF representative discussed potential grant funding for broader implementation. University outreach coordinators explored collaborative possibilities. Even a Department of Education official inquired about adapting the approach for national science education standards. "You've struck a nerve," Dr. Chen observed after the presentation. "There's been growing recognition that traditional science education often fails to provide authentic research experiences. Your project offers a practical solution rather than just theoretical criticism." As their time at Goddard drew to a close, Abby and Jason faced the bittersweet transition back to academic life. Jason would return to Cedar Falls for his final undergraduate semester before pursuing graduate studies in instrumentation design. Abby would head to Cambridge for her first term at MIT, carrying forward the NASA project through her specialized research track with Professor Williams. Their final week included comprehensive documentation transfer and training sessions with the NASA team members who would continue developing the project. Dr. Vasquez had secured funding for a 3-year implementation phase, with Abby and Jason maintaining consultant roles while completing their education. "This isn't an ending," Dr. Vasquez assured them during their final project meeting. "It's a transition to the next development phase. Your contributions will continue, shaping this initiative for years to come." On their last evening at Goddard, after completing the formal checkout procedures and submitting final reports, Abby and Jason visited the campus observatory. The facility was typically reserved for official research, but Dr. Patel had arranged special access as a farewell gesture. The observatory's main telescope, a 16-inch reflector with advanced tracking systems, offered views far beyond what Abby had achieved with her modest equipment in Iowa. They observed distant galaxies, planetary nebulae, and globular clusters, each observation connecting them to the broader scientific enterprise they had now joined as legitimate contributors. "It's strange," Abby commented as they took turns at the eyepiece. "I spent years looking up at these same objects from a barn roof, feeling completely disconnected from the scientific community. Now we're here, working with NASA, and those same observations seem linked to everything else." "Because they are," Jason replied thoughtfully. "Science is fundamentally connected, different scales and specialties examining aspects of the same reality. The divisions are human constructs, not natural boundaries." The philosophical conversation continued as they walked back to their apartment under a sky partially obscured by light pollution, but still revealing the brightest stars. Their summer at NASA had transformed them both professionally and personally, creating a foundation for future scientific contributions neither had imagined possible a year earlier. "What happens after MIT?" Jason asked, the question that had lingered unspoken between them throughout the summer. "Graduate school somewhere even further away?" "Distance is relative," Abby replied, echoing their earlier discussion of astronomical scales. "MIT is just the next step, not the final destination. The project continues regardless of geography." "The project," Jason repeated with a knowing smile. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Abby laughed, acknowledging the deliberate ambiguity. Their professional collaboration had become inseparable from their personal connection, both developing naturally from shared passion for accessible science. The return to Iowa brought contrasting emotions, comfort in familiar surroundings balanced against awareness of impending separation. Abby had 2 weeks at home before departing for MIT, time divided between family obligations and final preparations with Dr. Morgan at Cedar Falls. Her parents hosted a small gathering to celebrate her summer accomplishments and upcoming MIT enrollment. Neighbors and extended family members who had once viewed her scientific aspirations with polite confusion now expressed genuine pride in her NASA work, particularly its potential impact on rural schools like those in Meadow Creek. The high school science teacher asked if you'd speak to his classes when you're home for Christmas, her mother mentioned, arranging refreshments for the guests. He's been following the NASA educational project through Dr. Morgan's updates. "Of course," Abby agreed, recognizing another opportunity to strengthen connections between her scientific work and her rural origins. "I could bring prototype detector components for a demonstration." Her father, typically reserved about her academic pursuits, surprised her with a workshop addition he'd constructed behind the barn, a small but properly equipped space for her continued technical work during home visits. "Figure you'll need somewhere to tinker when you're back," he explained gruffly as he showed her the insulated room with dedicated workbenches and proper electrical service. "Can't have NASA projects sitting on hay bales anymore." The gesture represented more than practical support. It acknowledged that her scientific work had legitimate value on its own terms, not merely as a path to conventional success. The workshop created physical space for her continuing connection to Meadow Creek, ensuring that her expanding horizons wouldn't necessarily require abandoning her origins. Dr. Morgan had arranged a farewell gathering at Cedar Falls as well, bringing together faculty members and students who had supported the particle detector project throughout its development. The community college president attended briefly, announcing a new initiative inspired by Abby's NASA work, a rural science innovation program designed to identify and support students with similar potential but limited resources. Your experience has highlighted both the challenges and possibilities facing rural students with scientific aspirations, the president explained. We're establishing a dedicated pathway with targeted mentorship and resource access, hoping to replicate elements of your success with future students. The announcement represented tangible institutional change resulting from her journey, concrete support for others who might follow similar paths from rural isolation to scientific contribution. The program wouldn't eliminate all barriers, but it would provide recognition and resources that had been largely absent when Abby began. Her final days in Iowa passed too quickly, filled with practical preparations and emotional farewells. Jason would remain at Cedar Falls until December, continuing their NASA project work remotely while completing his degree requirements. They had established a detailed communication schedule that accommodated both their academic obligations and project responsibilities, creating structure for their temporary separation. The drive to Meadow Creek Airport on her departure day featured the same landscape that had once seemed confining but now appeared in a different light, not as limitation, but as foundation. The farmland stretching to the horizon represented not what she was leaving behind, but what she carried forward: practical problem-solving, resourcefulness, and connection to tangible reality that would continue informing her scientific approach regardless of institutional setting. "MIT won't know what hit them," Jason commented as they reached the small regional airport. "They're expecting a standard academic transfer student. They're getting a NASA-affiliated educational innovator with working prototypes and institutional partnerships. They're getting a farm girl who built a particle detector in a barn," Abby corrected, maintaining perspective on her fundamental identity despite recent achievements. "The rest is circumstantial." Their farewell blended personal and professional dimensions, both equally meaningful after a year of shared discovery and development. The NASA project would continue connecting them across institutional boundaries, providing structure for their ongoing collaboration regardless of geographic separation. As the small commuter plane lifted above the Iowa landscape, Abby watched familiar landmarks recede below: the patchwork of agricultural fields, the small clusters of farm buildings, the narrow roads connecting isolated communities. The perspective reminded her of the essential lesson her journey had revealed. Meaningful scientific contribution could begin anywhere, with any resources, if pursued with sufficient determination and creativity. The rejection letters that had once seemed to define her limitations had instead revealed alternate pathways with unexpected advantages. MIT would provide extraordinary resources and connections, but her scientific foundation had been built with repurposed electronics in a barn loft and refined in a community college basement. Both elements were equally valuable to her continuing development as a scientist and educator. The plane banked eastward, setting course for her connecting flight and ultimately Cambridge. Ahead lay prestigious laboratories, renowned professors, and elite institutional resources. Behind remained family, mentors, and the original particle detector that had started her unlikely journey. Neither direction represented rejection of the other. Instead, they formed complementary dimensions of her expanding scientific identity. As the Massachusetts Institute of Technology campus came into view from the taxi window, its iconic dome rising above the Cambridge skyline, Abby felt the convergence of her past and future in a single moment of clarity. The rural farm girl and the NASA researcher were not separate identities, but integral parts of the same journey, a story of persistence that had only just begun its most significant chapter. Her arrival at MIT coincided with an unexpected media event. Science Today, a prominent educational channel, had learned of the NASA initiative and requested an interview with the farm girl physicist, whose homemade detector had sparked a national education program. The resulting feature would highlight how rejection from elite institutions had ultimately created a more innovative pathway with broader impact than traditional academic routes. Sometimes the most significant discoveries come from unexpected places, Abby told the interviewer, standing in MIT's physics building while holding a component from her original barn loft detector. Scientific innovation doesn't require expensive equipment or prestigious locations. It requires curiosity, persistence, and the willingness to solve problems with whatever resources are available. The interview aired during her first semester, bringing attention not just to Abby's personal journey, but to the larger issues of accessibility in science education. Academic administrators, education policymakers, and funding agencies took notice of the NASA initiative's early success, prompting discussions about systemic barriers facing rural students with scientific aspirations. By spring semester 3, significant developments emerged from these conversations. First, the National Science Foundation established a Rural Innovation in STEM grant program, providing resources for students developing scientific projects outside traditional laboratory settings. The program explicitly cited Abby's particle detector as its inspirational model. Second, MIT launched a distributed science initiative, connecting its advanced research facilities with community colleges nationwide through collaborative projects and shared data collection networks. Dr. Morgan became the program's first community college liaison, creating formal pathways between Cedar Falls and Cambridge. Third, and most personally meaningful, Abby received an unexpected letter from Princeton University, the institution whose rejection had once seemed most devastating. They weren't offering belated admission, but something more significant, an invitation to help design their new alternative pathways to physics program for students from non-traditional backgrounds. The farm workshop her father had built became the headquarters for a summer science camp, where rural students built simplified versions of her detector, contributing real data to NASA's growing network while discovering their own potential for scientific contribution. Jason, now pursuing graduate studies in educational technology, developed the program alongside Abby, their personal and professional partnership strengthening despite geographic challenges. 3 years later, as Abby completed her MIT degree and prepared for graduate studies, she returned to the community college basement lab where her scientific journey had found its crucial turning point. The space had been renovated and expanded, now serving as the hub for a regional science innovation center that connected rural schools throughout the Midwest. Dr. Morgan, his hair now completely gray but his enthusiasm undiminished, greeted her with the news that 10 students from the program had received admission to top universities that year, each one carrying recommendation letters mentioning Abby's inspirational example. "Your rejection letters created more opportunity than any acceptance could have," he observed as they toured the facility where new generations of young scientists worked with simple but effective instruments. Sometimes the wrong door closing forces us to build entirely new structures. The NASA detector network had expanded to over 500 schools nationwide, with thousands of students contributing meaningful data to actual scientific research while developing practical skills and authentic research experiences. What had begun as one farm girl's desperate attempt to create scientific equipment with limited resources had transformed into a movement for democratizing participation in science. As Abby stood at the entrance of the community college that had once represented compromise but now symbolized innovation, she reflected on how dramatically circumstances could change when determination met opportunity, and how rejection could become the catalyst for unprecedented achievement. If you've been inspired by Abby's journey from farm workshop to NASA recruitment, remember that extraordinary potential exists in unexpected places, perhaps even in your own backyard, basement, or classroom. The most significant breakthroughs often come from those who refuse to accept conventional limitations. We'd love to hear your stories of overcoming rejection to find unexpected success. Share your experiences in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more inspiring tales of perseverance and achievement. Next week, we'll bring you the remarkable story of a veteran who transformed battlefield technology into life-saving medical innovations. Remember, sometimes the most powerful question isn't, "Why was I rejected?" but rather, "What can I build from this rejection?" Subscribe now to join us on this journey of discovery and transformation. "You've given us 12 weeks of work," Jason observed, studying the timeline. "This would normally take 12 months. "Welcome to government-funded science," Dr. Patel replied with a wry smile. "Always ambitious, occasionally realistic." Despite the daunting schedule, Abby felt energized by the project's potential impact. Her detector design, born from financial necessity and rural isolation, could become a template for thousands of similar systems built by students facing similar constraints. The educational barriers she'd struggled against might be lowered. For others, through her work, their NASA supervisors had arranged summer housing at the University of Maryland, where Abby and Jason shared a 2-bedroom apartment with another Goddard intern working on satellite communications. The university campus provided a vibrant environment far different from Cedar Falls, with research facilities open late into the night and constant scientific activities. "We should explore Washington, D.C. this weekend," Jason suggested as they settled into their new living arrangement. "All the Smithsonian museums are free. The Air and Space Museum seems obligatory for NASA interns." The summer quickly developed a demanding but exhilarating rhythm. Weekdays were consumed by project work at Goddard, with Abby focusing on documentation and design standardization, while Jason tackled software integration for the data collection network. Evenings often extended into additional research and collaboration with other interns. Weekends provided brief opportunities to explore the capital region's cultural and scientific offerings. Dr. Morgan maintained regular contact through video conferences, offering guidance on technical documentation and educational frameworks. He had remained at Cedar Falls for the summer session, but planned to visit Goddard in July to review their progress personally. 3 weeks into the internship, Abby received an unexpected email from MIT's physics department. Professor Catherine Williams, who would serve as her academic advisor in the fall, requested a meeting to discuss potential research connections between MIT and the NASA project. "They're taking your work seriously," Dr. Vasquez commented when Abby mentioned the meeting request. "Catherine Williams doesn't engage with undergraduates unless she sees significant potential. I can arrange for you to use our video conference facility for the discussion." The virtual meeting revealed yet another dimension of Abby's expanding professional network. Professor Williams, a renowned experimental physicist with multiple major publications, expressed genuine interest in establishing a formal connection between MIT's educational outreach programs and the NASA initiative. Your detector design addresses a critical gap in physics education, the professor explained. Most schools either use simulated data or expensive equipment that remains mysterious black boxes to students. Building functional scientific instruments provides authentic engagement with both the technology and the underlying physical principles. The conversation extended beyond the scheduled 30 minutes as Professor Williams outlined possibilities for Abby's continued involvement with the project while at MIT. Rather than separating her academic studies from her NASA work, the professor proposed integrating them through an independent research track focused on educational instrumentation. With appropriate structuring, your ongoing development work could satisfy certain laboratory requirements while advancing both NASA's goals and your own academic progress, she suggested. I'd be willing to serve as faculty sponsor if you're interested in this approach. The offer represented an unexpected solution to Abby's concerns about balancing her MIT education with continued involvement in the NASA project. Instead of choosing between prestigious academic training and meaningful scientific contribution, she might integrate them into a coherent educational experience. As July arrived, bringing even more oppressive humidity to the Maryland campus, the project entered its most intensive phase. The documentation of Abby's original design was complete, with standardized construction guides for all 3 implementation tiers. The focus shifted to testing prototypes built according to these specifications, identifying potential challenges students might encounter. The basic tier needs to work reliably with absolute minimal resources, Abby insisted during a design review meeting. No assumptions about available tools or materials beyond what's explicitly listed. That severely constrains the design, Dr. Patel pointed out. We could achieve better sensitivity with just a few specialized components, which would immediately exclude most rural schools, Abby countered. The entire point is accessibility. Better to have functional, but limited, instruments in 1,000 classrooms than optimal systems in 50. Dr. Vasquez nodded approvingly at Abby's argument. Exactly right. Educational impact requires scale, which requires genuine accessibility. The advanced tier can incorporate those specialized components for schools with more resources. The practical emphasis on accessibility rather than optimization represented a fundamental shift in Abby's thinking since her early research days. The rejection letters from elite universities had criticized her barn loft detector for its improvised methodology and non-standard components, precisely the elements that now made it valuable as an educational template. Dr. Morgan's July visit coincided with the first comprehensive testing of prototype detectors built from their documentation. The Cedar Falls professor arrived with additional perspective from educators who had reviewed preliminary materials through a small pilot program in Iowa schools. Rural science teachers are enthusiastic about the concept, he reported, reviewing feedback forms from the pilot participants. But they're concerned about technical support when problems inevitably arise. We need a troubleshooting framework as robust as the construction documentation. The observation led to development of a digital support system, an online community where educators implementing the detector project could share solutions, modifications, and teaching strategies. Jason took particular interest in this aspect, creating a prototype platform that connected directly to the data collection portal. Think of it as both a technical support network and a scientific collaboration space, he explained during a presentation to the NASA education team. Teachers and students can troubleshoot construction issues while simultaneously discussing actual scientific observations. The comprehensive approach impressed even Dr. Patel, who had initially seemed skeptical about the project's ambitious scope. "You've addressed the fundamental challenge of distributed scientific instrumentation," he acknowledged, "not just the technical aspects, but the human infrastructure required for sustainability." By early August, with their internship nearing its final weeks, Abby and Jason had produced a complete implementation package: construction guides, curriculum materials, data collection software, and support infrastructure. 5 prototype detectors operated continuously on the Goddard campus, each built to different specification tiers, but all contributing usable data to a test version of the network portal. Dr. Vasquez organized a formal presentation for NASA administrators and potential educational partners, including representatives from the National Science Foundation and several major university outreach programs. Abby found herself addressing senior scientists and education specialists with a confidence that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. The Accessible Science Instrumentation Initiative democratizes participation in actual scientific research, she explained, displaying real-time data from their prototype network. Students don't just learn about scientific principles, they actively contribute to data collection while developing practical skills in electronics, programming, and experimental design.